So we're here today at Civo Navigate. Civo Navigate is a conference that is focused on cloud native technologies. So Civo does a lot around the Kubernetes space and they provide hosted Kubernetes services. And we got involved in sponsoring the event because we like their platform and we think they've got a really mature approach to security in this sort of space. At this event, we've done a few different things, from a number of workshops we've done and also a main stage talk where we talked about all the things that are exposed on the internet and the reasons why we are seeing lots of things we see in the current security space. And the strategy here, or the idea, the concept of the presentation was to help people to understand a bit more about why they might be exposed and what is exposed. So the idea I had for this one was to say, well, why don't we just go and have a look around on the internet and see all the things that people wouldn't expect to see on the internet. And we found things like systems to control the ventilation in the swimming pool. We found grain terminals where you could see how they were drying the grain. And then we found all sorts of things around internet connected devices. We found number plate recognition software. We even found somebody's power management system. So essentially they had their home connected to their energy company. The energy supplier, I guess, would provide them a smart meter or something, and you could see this smart meter that was connected to the internet. You could find the address of the smart meter, and we managed to link it all the way back to somebody whose actual Facebook profile there was. The concept was to just help people understand that sometimes, and a lot of the time through misconfiguration, systems are just exposed and people don't know it. And then we often get this scenario where businesses say, well, I'm not a target, why would I be a target? And they don't realize the reason why you're a target is just because you're in the right place at the wrong time, or the wrong place in the right time for the attackers, because the attackers are just scouring the internet for exposed services. And if they find something like this and they can use it as leverage, they will. I think there is very much, especially in some of the spaces around the cloud native side, is because it's still very new and innovative, that people are still playing around with it and still utilizing sort of functionality within the technology maybe that they haven't used before, but they're not really thinking about the security aspects of it. Maybe they're more focused on, like, how does this work? Can I get it up and running? And to kind of play around with it and just getting on with it and doing. It's the kind of fail fast mentality sometimes in the cloud native space. And that can sometimes lead to things being inadvertently exposed, not necessarily by even the person that's playing around with the technology. Maybe somebody else comes along and just reconfigures something in the environment they're using, and all of a sudden that thing that shouldn't really be exposed to the internet all of a sudden is. There's a number of different key areas really to securing a Kubernetes environment, because you have this notion of images, which are the things that you deploy. Your systems are developed in a way that you've got an image which can be repeatable, so you can keep deploying new things, or you can scale, and you can always use that same image as your kind of base image. And the idea is to get that to be a point where it's super secure and well hardened. And then the things that you use, like the operating system, a similar thing you should try to do is to make sure that you have a process by which you're using the minimum. And I talk a lot about that in the talk as well, about the idea that at the moment a lot of the attackers are using a concept which is called living off the land. And basically what they're doing is, rather than developing specific malware and technologies to use to hack systems, they're just using what's available to them because it's more difficult to detect. So for example, giving a very simple example, if somebody is using the command prompt on a normal Windows machine and using that tool and whatever tools are available on a Windows machine, it doesn't look very suspicious, because it could be just the average IT guy going in and making changes, or a lot of people might know how to use a command line and they could quite happily use it. And there's things like PowerShell on Windows, which are very powerful, but it's there and available to the operating system, so it's native, right? It's normal. Whereas if an attacker comes in and he wants to attack a system and he's got tools of his own, if he starts to deploy that onto a system, it seems very obvious to somebody, if they're monitoring it, to go, well, that's really suspicious. What is that? I don't even know what that is. And it raises that air of suspicion immediately. So that's why the attackers are now trying to use what's available to them, because it means that they're less likely to be detected. What we're saying about these kind of operating systems and these images is you lock them down, and if you harden them to a point where it's only there for the purpose of the thing that you want it to be there to do, then you wouldn't have this problem of them being able to live off the land or utilize they'd have to deploy software to be able to exploit the system, because there wouldn't be anything available for them to use. All the way through, I sort of talk a lot about this, and we talk about this generally from cybersecurity. You've got to make it easy for people to make good decisions. So your employees, for example, if you give them lots of permissions on their machines and somebody hacks them, the attacker's going to be able to use those permissions. Whereas if you limit their permissions and you give them very restrictive access, just enough for them to be able to do their jobs, then the chances of them getting phished and it being a really bad day are greatly reduced. So the same concepts are true with cloud security and in cloud native technologies. If you can sort of set the right baseline, so a good, strong, hardened operating system, a very well built image that can be reused and repeated, that you know is kept up to date and can be just deployed en masse as needed, then you're already a good way towards having this defense in depth and also a strategy of security by design. And then once it starts going into something they call runtime, so then the system's actually active and running and doing the job that it's supposed to be doing, then you can start monitoring it as it's being interacted with by users or attackers and bad guys. And that becomes a little bit more traditional in the sense of you're monitoring systems, you're patching the images and then redeploying into the runtime the new images as you go, which also is a great way of making sure you're always up to date. Because if you think about a traditional model, when something's in production, you're scared to patch it, because if you break it, it breaks production. Whereas with cloud and cloud native technologies, the concept is you should be able to deploy any time without breaking anything, which means you can patch something, upgrade it, push it back out into production, and nothing ever stops working, right? It's always up and running. And there was a really interesting bit that we talked about in the talk. There was somebody called Kelsey Hightower who was on just before us, who was the sort of main speaker, and he'd made a point before to say that in this sort of space, you've got people that are expected to have security knowledge or be able to do security things like DevOps engineers or developers, and the assumption that the business that they're employed by is that these people should have that experience, they should know about it in their role. And I sort of agreed with his point of view. He was saying that why do we just expect them to be security experts? Should we more kind of spread the problem around a bit more and say that everybody should have an awareness of security, but we don't expect them to be experts? Maybe they should go to a third party that understands it, and it's a shared responsibility. It's basically the CTO and the CISO of an organization, or the people that are responsible for the security aspects. If they don't have a CTO or a CISO, will understand the scope of the problem and where things need to be secured. But the developers and the engineers and the network engineers that then go on to deploy these technologies, they're not necessarily going to know what that needs to be, but they can certainly implement the change and they could be part of solving the problem. But should they be the people that decide on what the controls are and how to secure it? And so there's a kind of a shared context in the middle where the CTO, the CISOs, the people that are responsible for security converge with the people that are going to go and deliver the thing, and they make sure that they promote good security as part of that shared responsibility. It kind of aligns very nicely with a concept talked about in the cybersecurity space, which is about secure by design. And but a principle of that really is that when you're developing an application, security is part of that initial design. So I quite like that idea, and that's what we talked about in the talk, is that we're not expecting everybody to be a cybersecurity expert. We expect them to have a layman's understanding of security and the ability to be able to implement a consolidated kind of view of security and implement the decisions of a group of people as opposed to an individual just being the one person to be responsible for it. And that was it really, that was my talk. And also actually the event was really well run, lovely venue, really good facilities and some other great speakers which really drew a good crowd.